Hello there, good morning and welcome once again to my little arty corner of YouTube. My name's Angela and I particularly enjoy creating art. Drawing with pen on paper is my thing, although I'm quite happy to draw digitally as well, but I don't like showing that on film because I zoom in and out and twist things around at a fast rate of knots and it makes me seasick if I ever watch it back, let alone anybody else. So I'd like to say thank you to everybody who's subscribed. I'm chuffed to bits and I thank you all so much and I appreciate each and every one of you. And welcome to my new subscribers, my recent subscribers as well. If you're new here and you enjoy what you see, please consider subscribing. I do release videos most days, but not Thursdays or Sundays, because those are 2 days where life can get a bit hectic and it gets more hectic when I try to film and fit in a video. It's one of those things. So and my particular style of art is quite stylised, quite full of patterns and texture, quite intricate, and often with a big dose of whimsy, because in my whimsical world, there's love and peace and things just get on and everything's pretty and nice. And it's an escape from the world around us. You know, and the news that we hear. So, and I think it's nice to bring some whimsy into people's lives. So thank you very much. Okay, over the last couple of videos, I've been playing around with Neocolor 2, which are water-soluble wax pastels, wax crayons if you prefer. And late yesterday, I had a delivery of 2 types of gesso. They're both from Art Basics, the Art Basics range, the Finibert Art Basics from Prima. And I have here heavy gesso, heavy white gesso, and clear gesso. Now the white gesso can be opaque if you put it on heavily thick, but it can also be quite translucent. And the clear gesso is exactly what it says, it dries completely clear, not shiny. And I have tried these out, and I've got quite a few of the Polaroid things to, hang on. Right, let me fix my autofocus, otherwise I'll be getting seasick as well. These Polaroid things that I showed you yesterday, they're fun. So I've made a few because I was experimenting with these. And what the lovely thing is about using gesso is you can build layers of colours up without muddying them. I'm going to show you because I've got my sketchbook out here. I love this one, it's nice and delicate. I think I used some white gesso with this as well to tone the colours down a little bit where they were a bit bright. This one is the Inktense Background I did. I used Inktense pencils for this. And I used the glassy gel medium on it yesterday. But for me to draw on those really intense colours, I'd have had to use white. And I much prefer drawing black. So I used some of the white gesso just to tone it back. Not exactly the same everywhere. And I did use water with the gesso just to water it down a bit. Again, this one. There's gesso on all of the, oh no, that's the Inktense one that was a bit, oh yeah, that was Inktense as well. This is also Inktense. But I did use white just to tone these colours down a bit. And I like this more muted, to be honest. I like the patchiness and the sort of dustiness it gives to that. This one, I do want to do something more with that, I think. But it'll be fine. And this one as well. This one was a bit garish, is Neocolor. The lovely thing about gesso is that it's brilliant for priming paper. Now, this is the Hahnemuhle D&S sketchbook that I've been working in quite a bit and often fixing paper in here. Like if I move back a page or two, like here. So I've worked on other paper so that I can work with water-based media without fear of the paper pilling and everything. This paper's not designed for wet media. And it pills and the surface gets destroyed very quickly if you overwork or rework things. But gesso puts an end to that, and I'm going to show you. And I'm going to work on here, I'm going to make a background, and I will do some drawing, and I will edit out, or, you know, cut from time to time. I've left the little lid on this because there's lots of gesso in there. So let me just pop that there. I've got a nice big brush. Oh no, wrong brush. That's not the brush I wanted. This one. It's just a Royal Langnickel sort of synthetic hair soft grip brush. Relatively inexpensive, and I don't mind if they get gunged up. So I have wetted the brush in some water. I've picked up a bit of gesso and I'm just going to apply it over the paper. It doesn't have to be a thick layer though. With the this is heavy bodied gesso, which means you could build up texture if you want to. It is what it is at the end of the day. But the idea is just to get a layer down as quickly as you can, because it does dry really quickly as well, gesso, even with water added. Obviously, bigger brush means you can do this quicker, but I'm a bit of a potcher when it comes to brushes and things. So, and I'm making sure I try to overlap the edges and go right up to the edge of my page. As I said, there's no need to fuss around with this. And what this will do is it will allow me to work directly on this page with watercolour media and whatever else without destroying the bottom. Now, the one thing I love about this gesso, and I'm so glad I read the descriptions, because I've steered away from using gesso for a long time, because drawing on it can be a pain. It can be very gritty and very, gritty is the right word for it, gritty, sandy. And drawing with pens is not a pleasant experience for me. I'm not sure about everybody, because I'm sure some people would love that, because everybody's different. It's not a criticism. My voice sounded like I was criticising, but it wasn't. Everybody's different, and we all like working in different ways and in different media. But this is a way that I can prime the paper, seal the paper, which is essentially what gesso is. It's a primer, it's a sealant, but it can be used in other ways as well. It's great for, white gesso is great for toning colours back, knocking them back a bit if they're a bit garish, and but also allowing you to work in layers, because a thin layer of it with white gesso is translucent. Now I'm just making sure I get right to the edge of here, because I can't remember where I've gone. And it's not easy to see where you've been, if there's any patchy bits, because when it's dry, it's dry. Okay, we're nearly done. I'm sure I've done all over there. I'm just trying to check. The other thing about gessos are that you can actually colour them, tint them with any medium that will mix with them. So you can use watercolours, Inktense, Neocolors, anything like that, and it will tint them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop the lid on this. So I'll be back in a moment. I'm just going to dry this with my heat gun just to make sure it's nice and dry, so you don't need to see or hear. There we go, all nice and dry. And a bit wrinkled because the paper is quite thin, and it's got damp, and it will wrinkle as it dries, especially if I heat gun it. If I'd left it to dry naturally, it wouldn't have wrinkled quite so much. But the heat tool just speeds that process up, and you don't have to wait for the paint to dry. So I've decided that for my background here, I'm going to use Neocolors on the gesso to show that they do work. And this one, if you're interested, is ochre. I have sanguine here, which is a reddish, browny colour-ish. I've got brown, and I've got two blues. I've got this one, which is cobalt blue, and I've got a blue turquoise, a turquoise blue. Because I want something that might look a little bit like verdigris copper. So I'm going to start with some of the ochre, and I'm just going to spread some over here. I don't want it too dark, because I'm going to want to work on top of this. I know I'm reaching across the screen. I do apologise. Ish. So I'm adding some of the reddish, the sanguine on the top. I've got no idea how these are going to look at work. I'm just going to use some water, and I'm just going to activate them with water and move them around a bit with water. You can actually use the gesso to do this, but I'm going to use a brush and water today so I can get it right up to the edge of the paper as well. Now, if this was just the ordinary paper here, I would see already the surface of this paper beginning to lift or to pill, to be, you know, to degrade and not work very nicely with the water. But with gesso, it just gives, it waterproofs the surface amongst other things, but it creates a new surface that you work on. And you can actually use very thin get a very thin layer of gesso, and it works just as well. And it hasn't thickened the paper at all. If I'd used a thick layer, it would. But it's great fun. And you can use your finger to do this if you're so inclined. Ick. I'm not very good with ick. I just don't like sticky and mucky, and I get through a lot of things to clean it up, whereas perhaps I can just get the same kind of effect with my brush and dabbing like this. Now I think I can see where there are spaces where I haven't got quite as much gesso on. Can you see there where the paper, the colours sort of like made its own texture in there and up here? So these are places where I missed with the gesso, but I'm okay with that. It is what it is. Okay, so I'm going to seal this with gesso, and I like this colour, so I don't want to knock it back, so I'm going to use some of the clear gesso. And clear gesso does go on white. You can see this one's runnier, it's more fluid than the white gesso because it's not a heavy body one. Heavy body in art just means thick. So I'm just going to pick it up. The fact that this isn't dry doesn't matter very much. And I can just pop it on. I could have used this gesso to actually activate the Neocolors because it does that. But I really want to keep the texture that I've created underneath. And so this will do it rather nicely. And I will put my finger in it there, just to keep the page down. And I can see where this is going because it is giving a shine in the way that the other one didn't. It doesn't dry shiny, so it's not a gloss medium, but it does dry transparent, see-through. So it doesn't knock the colours back, or if it does, it's just a tiny bit. It will until it's dried because it has got that milkiness to it. It's the nature of gesso. And I'm not being particular about getting a very smooth coverage. The texture will make things interesting as we add another layer. But I do want to make sure I cover this almost in its entirety. If there's bits that I haven't covered, I'm not going to stress about it because they'll add to the overall background. I'm not trying for perfection. That's not the name of the game with things like this. This is just creating a fun background. And also, I'm learning about how I can get gesso to work for me, don't forget. Because this is all experimenting, it's all trying things out and seeing where it leads you more than anything else. That ringing noise you heard is me just making sure I rinse out my brush mostly, get it damp, while I just zap this with the heat tool. And this time I think I'll just do it because it's mostly dry. So it is quite good fun. It's got a very, very fine, sort of soft, chalky tooth to it when it's dry. It's rather lovely to touch. And I said I haven't tried drawing on it yet. That's going to be the next step today. So I'm hoping I can get this done quite quickly and mostly in real time. So you can see how quickly you can create a background. Now I'm using my Neocolor 2s. I could have used Inktense pencils, which dry. They dry permanently, but that layer of gesso in between, or being able to use the white gesso to knock the colours back, gives you layers of colour as well with them. Because you can layer them, but if you don't want so much yeah, showing through. They're fun to play with. I could have used distress inks, though they move an awful lot with gesso, so it would be better to actually put some gesso onto a palette or a mat or a scrap piece of paper and mix some distress ink into it to tint the gesso. That's always possible. How's that doing? That's hot. And look, this is the other side. I deliberately chose this page that had drawings on the other side. And you can see, although it's a bit wrinkled, it hasn't affected those drawings at all. And I just want to reassure you of that. So this it cools down quite quickly, and it has this lovely sort of chalky feel to it now. And I said I wanted something that looked like I've got some verdigris on this. So that's why I've chosen these blues. And I'm just going to pop them here and there. I don't want them all over. I don't want total coverage. I just want to be able to get some of these colours in, perhaps, as if there's some random bits of corrosion going on. That'll be quite nice. And I'm going to use a wet brush again just to activate the Neocolors. Some of this may seep through at the edge here to the page underneath, that one with the shells on. Again, it's a sketchbook. This is what happens in sketchbooks. I'm going to just tap some water in there and see if we can be better off with a round brush for doing that if I want some blooms and things. If anything, these work a bit better on the gesso than they do on paper, especially as you know you can really work them to activate them with the water as well, knowing that you're not going to damage the paper underneath. So, not that I've used many brands of gesso, but I have used a couple of them over the years, and I haven't used it for a long time. But this one, I'm going to just use water, go around the edges of this just to soften the edges a little bit where I've got these harsh lines. And then I've got enough of that brown colour underneath showing through. So again, I'm going to give this just a quick zap. I've used a fair amount of gesso over the years, but I've disliked it because it's got that gritty feel, but this really does feel like a chalky surface without the chalk rubbing off. So it's got that softness about it. So I'm quite intrigued to draw on it and see what happens. But first I need to make the backgrounds. So I am drying this quickly with the heat tool. If I look on the side, I can see how the light catches patches of water. And I just want to dry those up, mostly, so that I can then go back and I'll use the clear gesso to seal this in before I, yep, that is the clear gesso, before I do anything else here. So and I could add more layers of colour or extra colour here. So if I put some brown over the tops of these blues, it would show as brown with the gesso. It wouldn't mix in as much. And if I used white gesso to blend some areas out, it definitely would show over, but I'm not too worried. I quite like this as it is. I think it'll do for today. And it might all be wrinkly, the paper, but it'll be fine. It'll be fine. The Polaroids were wrinkly. When I'd finished them last night, they curled up and everything. So I just popped them under under this cutting mat I'm working on. And then the big felt bag, or, you know, organiser that I've got that I keep sketchbooks and pots of things that I use often in, I put on the top because it's quite weighty and it'd squash them flat by morning. So this just really needs to be closed up, and, you know, something heavy like my organiser bag pops on the top. So I think I've got, I say I've got most areas, I'm not sure. I do want to make sure that with the last coat I do cover it really well, especially in the areas where I'm likely to be drawing. And then one quick blast with the heat tool and I'll tidy up and get the materials out I'll need for drawing, and then let's do a bit of an exploration of something. Is it on this page? Right, that'll do. I think I've got everywhere. So I'll be back in a moment. I'm just going to tidy up and dry this and what have you. So see you in a mo. Oops. Okay. So there we are, all done. And I'm quite happy with that. It's perhaps a bit darker than I would like. Part of me is thinking, yeah, perhaps I should have used some white gesso on the top just to mute it down a bit. But it is what it is, and I'm happy to work with it. So I've got a selection of drawing pens here. I've got a Pigma Sensei, it's an 04. I like these, they've got a plastic tip. I've got a Micron 01. It's a very fine, so I'll find out how that'll work on this gesso surface. I've got a pencil in case I need it, and I'm likely to in a mo, possibly. And I've got a white jelly roll as well, just to see. And I have my my pattern book here, my Zibladoni, my visual dictionary, my visual collection. You know, my collection of favourite motifs or patterns I might like to use in the future, things I like and have put together. And I think I'm going to use this today. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start by, I'm drawing just a line on here because I want to give myself a bit of a, well, I'm giving myself a shelf to put things on, which is quite fun. Now the skipping bits of the lines are my error because I'm drawing on this and it's an inch or so above the surface of the table. Part of me thought, yeah, I'm going to cut this out and put it back in afterwards. But I thought, no, let's see how I go. It may come to that. It may come to that. We'll see. So I thought I'd have a look at arc shapes like this and see what I can do with them. Because I do like an arch. On its own, it's interesting, you could use it, but it's pretty, you know, it'd be fun to colour in with pattern, but we could add some things to it. So, my favourite thing is just to do this, and then just to add some fill in here. Now, the gesso makes the page really quite flexible. It changes the feel of the page in terms of what happens when you bend it and so on. That's partly because gesso, I think, is acrylic. Well, I think it's acrylic based in this case, and acrylic paints are sort of rubbery and plasticky when they dry. But that's all to the good. My big bulldog clip here is just to keep the paper down as I draw on it, because it is, you can see it's folding and bending. But I can feel as I'm drawing with the pen on this that I can feel it catch on the tooth, but it's no worse than, you know, quite a textured paper that you draw on. I have some Fabriano toned paper, and that feels similar to this when I draw on it, if I remember rightly. It's got quite a good tooth on it because it's designed really not for pen drawing but for pastels and coloured pencils and so on, so it's got quite a lot of tooth. And, you know, something like Caddy paper, which is recycled cotton rag, and it makes nice watercolour paper, but it's got a hell of a tooth to it. Really, really strong tooth. So, you know, it's got that, but it feels softer, but it still doesn't feel like I'm damaging the nib of the pen, which is all I'm really that interested in. So I'm just going to see what ways I could fill this in with just simple patterns and see what variations I can come up with. If I'm drawing on a small scale, it'd be quite hard to do many of these, but you just never know, do you? You never know. With this one, I'm going to start to remind myself that if I thicken lines, make lines thicker, or heavier if you prefer that term, increase the amount of ink, then it gives that feeling of dimension. I think I might need to zoom in just a tad. Let's have a look. There we are. Now you can see what I'm doing better. Let's have a look. So I've got horizontal lines there. So we'll go like this, like this. And let's try some vertical lines like this. I'm not going to do stripes like that because I just can't get enough in this space easily. But I'm just going to leave them like that, just to give that bit of shadow. And of course, if we can do vertical and horizontal lines, we definitely can do a checkerboard kind of pattern, which is my next thought. Nothing fancy schmancy here so far, eh? Just really simple things, from just filling that centre space with just a row of black dots. I could have just left plain horizontal stripes, but I didn't. So perhaps if I do that in this one, fairly equidistant. And then in this one, let's do some cross hatching. But I think with my cross hatching, I'm going to break these lines, as in leave gaps in them at random, and random numbers of gaps and different sizes. And then for the vertical ones, excuse me while I turn my page, just to get the angle a bit easier for me to draw, I'm going to do the same. And it is cross hatching, but you end up with something that looks like, you know, like a woven sack. You know, almost like the weaving is really poor and beginning to break apart. So I quite like that. I find that a fun, or perhaps like metal grating that's been eroded, corroded over time. So I quite like things like that. Okay, so let's do a checkerboard. And I will pop a little one on the side there, and then horizontal lines. And I'm not going to fill all of this in, but I'm going to do some of it quickly with you. But you know how it'll look when it's finished. Perhaps it won't take me that long. Working on this gesso makes me think, oh, perhaps I ought to do this to every piece of paper I draw on, which would be very silly. But it is nice. I just got panicked then, so there we are. So a little checkerboard pattern, that works nicely as well. Okie dokes. So let's have another one. And yeah, I always am putting that this kind of border here as if it really is an arched doorway of some kind, because I really do like this kind of effect. I do. And here I'm just going to pop in zigzags, because that'll fill it in. This is a Zentangle pattern called Jonquil. So it's a variation of the checkerboard pattern, except it's based on chevron or rhomboid shapes. And it works nicely. It gives dimension in a way the checkerboard doesn't. Although you can make checkerboards have dimension if you want to, because it's a case of bending these lines. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to bend those out. I'm going to choose a place where I want the centre, and then I'm going to Then the lines around that. Perhaps I'll make the middle one black and then work around so that will look like it's bulging inwards. Sure, we could work on this so it looks like it's bulging inwards rather than outwards. Did I just say that it looks like it's bulging inwards? That is not what I meant. But it gives you that sort of like op art illusion. But that's a bit fun. Okay, what else can we do here? I'm showing you this because if I dig out my letters, I did an H yesterday evening here, and along the edge I've got quite large ones of these, but you could almost put patterns in these edgings like that as well, which would be quite fun, where you use quite big and bold. I quite like this one. It was the one that had the heart shape in it, so I'm getting it. It's really hard for me to think of patterns or find patterns that I can put in the background that aren't too busy but have pattern on them. And I did actually seal this with the glassy gel as well, because I thought then they would tie in, and of course now I've got gesso. Just don't ask. So, but just things like this, the bigger you use a motif, the more you can do with it, and how we can make things into repeating patterns. So let's use part of the jonquil, just 2 lines, and we'll use them like this. It then looks like we've got sort of like a curvy leaf in there. We could just use one and put it on one side, perhaps, like so. Quite like that. On the other side, you could put something like some circles to fill that space or make something different. I quite liked it plain. Perhaps darker lines. I haven't been thickening the lines on all of these. But on this one, perhaps I will. See, it looks a bit more like it's set inwards then. Okay, let's go this way. I'm going to make this a bit wider on the outside. I'm going to put very fine border there. I think I'll put a fine one around this. Not very well. And then I can use this as an area to fill. I'm just going to use perk because the opportunities or the different kinds of patterns or textures you could put in this could be almost endless. But this will remind me this is something I can do, and perhaps I will do one just on the end of this last shelf. Very tiny one in the middle. I think I'll make that black there. And then I'm just going to zigzags can be awkward, but they can be done, and I haven't done a very good job here. The key to doing zigzags, I think, is to put is to divide this up into blocks to begin with, and then draw the diagonal lines in the blocks, as it were. But get the idea. Reminds me very much of Romanesque architecture. Tea in the way. Okay, let's draw another line. I love drawing on a coloured background. There is just something about it that just makes your drawings feel that little bit more finished at the end, perhaps. It gives that feeling of, it gives a character or a feeling, an emotion, or, you know, something different to this. And I guess with this looking almost like an old wall, that these could almost look like doors. It gives that suggestion that perhaps they are doorways. Perhaps that's what I'm drawing here, really. Okay, what about other things? I'm going to pop a line down the middle, well, border down the middle, and then I'm going to draw sprouting spirals. That's what I'm going to call these, because they look like they're sprouting plants there. And here I think I'm going to put a little bit of black there, and then I'm just going to add lines there just to, oh no, I think I'll just fill it all in with black. That wouldn't work out very nicely. And then down here, a couple of things we can do, but I think what I'm going to do is just put some lines under here, almost like we've got perk, but that will work nicely. So we have that going on. So I'm going to make this just that little bit bigger, and perhaps up here, instead of having the line going straight like this, perhaps we can have it going like this, and then I can draw the spirals off this area here as if it's they're part of that curved line down. And then at the top here I'm going to put something that could be almost like a flower. Could be. Like so. A little bit of black there. And then there's other things, there's lots of options for what we can do in the bottom, but I'm just going to simply fill this area in with some cross hatching rather than black. Different tone in there. I'm not very keen on this at the top, but I think I'll fill this all in black, because I'll come back with the white gel pen when it's all dried properly. Okie doke, so spirals are really fun to use to fill spaces in. So I've got 2 spirals here, coming down, matching the central point and curving round, and trying to match it up on the other side. Doesn't have to be perfect. These sections I think I will fill with black because they're just too small for me to do anything with. And down here, perhaps I will. Going to go down to where I think the centre is, and then just give myself this kind of little diamond shape. And then these perhaps I will fill with some tipple. Tiny little circles just to fill those spaces up, but still allow some of the colour to come through. Again, it's that tonal difference. So that's quite fun. Okay. The bigger you make these, the easier it is to fill these in with patterns and so on. I think on this one I'm going to fill it in with, going to put a big spiral. In fact, it's off to one side, doesn't matter. One little bit, but I am going to just do a bit of black there. Underneath I'm just going to fill it in with these little dots. So that works out okay. I could come back and use colour to fill that in if I wanted to, though I will be cautious with this pen because I don't quite know how it will be on top of gesso if I add water to it. The ink looks a lot blacker on top of gesso because it doesn't sink into the paper, and that sinking in and binding to the paper fibres is what makes things permanent. It bonds to them, and here I don't know how well this bonds to gesso, so that's another experiment to be done. In fact, let me put a little square of ink at the top and some dots perhaps, and we'll have a look at how water affects with that when they've had a chance to dry. Or I might zap them with the heat tool. That might be sensible because that might help them to sink into the gesso that little bit more. Okay. And of course, if the pen moves with gesso, when I've used it on top of gesso, it didn't move when I added, did I add it? No, I added the gel medium. And that was just on paper, that letter A. So that's not a fair test. I don't know if it will move with gesso, the pen. So again, that's another test. So this is going to be water. We'll try this with gesso and see how they move. Can't see what I've done, sorry. I've just put squares of pen there and some dots underneath, so I can see what will happen if I add water to this once they dry and gesso once they dry, and see if that affects this pigment ink. That's all I'm going to say. Okay, so this one I've just put some circles on stalks inside. These are stalks going straight up, but there's nothing to say we can't have them bending to one side as well. Ooh. I'm also going to do a well in there. I've based it on the triangle rather than a square, and I do like well is one of my favourite patterns, I think. It's quite versatile. You might not think it is, but it really is. So I'm just going to add some lines into these sections. But that's really quite nice. Perhaps in this one I'll add some little rice shapes here. Perhaps we can get half rice shapes in the bottom. That looks quite nice. I say rice shapes, they're leaf shapes because I've made them pointy on the ends. But we have that, so that's quite nice, I think. Pop a little dot in the middle just to help to differentiate them. Shadows or adding colour will do that. And again, what colour I can use with this does depend on how these pens react with water and so on. I think you can use alcohol markers on top of gesso, and this might be a perfect way to seal the paper so the alcohol marker doesn't spread through to the other side. It's a pricey way of, well, it's a time consuming way of doing it in some ways, but it's, you know, it is what it is. Okay, what else? So I'm going to fill this side here with lots of lines close-ish together. And on this side, I'm going to add a couple of spirals or spiralling sprouts just to add interest on that side. So they don't have to be symmetrical. Quite like that. Okie dokes. How else can we do something here? Just would look like bricks. I'm doing this without anything inside because then I have that space within to do something with. And I've got ideas for patterns here already. So in this one I'm going to add a border inside, but I'm also going to do, I was going to say black and white blocks, but I can come back and add white if I want to the other ones. So I quite like that. I do like these. They always add a touch of whimsy, don't they, when you add these black and white squares. I don't know why. But they always are quite whimsical, in my mind anyway. Now I've done a fair amount of drawing here with this pen, and the nib seems to be working in exactly the same way as it did to begin with. So I'm just popping here. I hope you saw those. I think I forgot to move the page along. This could be a disaster of a video. I'm sorry if it is. But just these whimsical blocks instead, and so on. So I'm trying to remember. I'm not very good at remembering, am I? Sorry. So here I've just divided this into 3 areas with this Y shape, and I'm going to echo them like this. And I think on this one I'm going to weave the lines in like so, and at the top just do that. That's really quite dimensional. With shadowing, this will look really like it's stepping down and down and down and further away. I think I could enhance that if I just add another line there, fill that edge with black. So it just gives you that feeling that, oh, that's further away. That's quite fun. Like that one. That's something I haven't done before. I know that one's definitely new to me. I'll just put some shadow there as well, which will help. Okay, one last one perhaps, because this is going to be a bit of a long video, I suspect. So there's a lovely arch there. And I'm just thinking, how can I do this? So perhaps I'll pop a leaf here. It looks almost like the window in a door, doesn't it? Almost as if. Perhaps we'll do this kind of idea again on each side. Sort of like a straight line, curved line, straight line down, curved line, vertical lines, curves, vertical lines, curves, vertical lines, curves. There'll be one vertical line over here. There'll be one there. So that's quite nice. I like that. It's quite fun actually. Yeah, I have my moments. So this could be absolutely endless. I could keep on going and going and going. And we haven't even looked at how, as well as having patterns within, this is what I should have done in pencil with the zigzags earlier on, because it's easy then to get nice zigzag shapes sort of in these. But there's nothing to say we can't add things around the outside of the arch. Like so. I'm putting circles here at the bottom rather than little half circles, semicircles, which gives a different kind of feel. We haven't looked at different shapes of these really either. So that one's quite nice, just to have something simple and singular in there like that. But with, well, I've made these taller than the others. But this would be quite nice to have patterns around it as well. Not sure about the zigzags. It looks like a scary chainsaw. But it's, you know. And if I do another one, perhaps we can use flux. Move it over a bit to create kind of a leafy edge to it. I messed up at the top a little bit, but you get the idea. Just fill in the spaces with black, and then props those there and that. So you can do things like that, or even and use things like this as part of that design. There's nothing to say we can't do that. In fact, it could be quite fun. But again, the caveat is that you have to be conscious of the size of the arches and whether what you add to them is going to work or not. My arches are still a bit small for this, but they could work. You know, I've got that one there. And perhaps I'll just pop some circles in here just to fill this one in. Do it rather quickly and messily, but Sketchbook is my shout for that. So all I'm doing is getting ideas down and reminding myself of things I can do. You know, make them narrow, make them really wide, and just see what happens and what you can pop in them. The more space you've got, the more you can do inside, as I just put a row of circles in there. So this is all a lot of fun. And just before I go, let's have a go at this with some water. My water is a bit scuzzy here, but it'll work. Okay, let me get a paintbrush, that'll do. So let's have a look. There's a tiny bit moving, but nothing much. And it's easy enough just to blot that little bit up that has moved. So that's really good. Right, let's get the clear gesso. Heavy gesso, clear gesso. And let's see what happens when I pop some clear gesso over the top. So just pick some up. And that doesn't move it noticeably that I can see, which is, there's some actually if I work at it too much, so the secret, like anything, is just don't work at it. So that means this will be safe to add water-soluble media to. If I chose to, because they will stick to gesso, but you just have to be careful if you want to add water or anything else on top of those colours, that you seal them in first, is the caveat here, I think. So I hope you've enjoyed this. It's another quite long video, but sometimes it's nice to do, you know, long. I only ever do long videos. And I hope it's given you some ideas, and if you've ever wondered about gessos and whether you can use them, you certainly can. This page, I'll just show you the underneath as well. There's some blue there because that's where, let me zoom out. There's some blue there because that's where this dripped over to the scrap paper underneath catching stuff. So I'm not bothered about that, but no damage to my drawings there. And here, it's just lovely. Gesso has dulled the white a bit, but the black, so I'm sure I can bring the colours out with the, you know, a glossy gel medium if I wanted to. But I quite like it just as it is. So as I say, I hope this has shown you what gesso can do. I'm not saying you have to go out and buy it. You don't. You don't have to do anything in the way I do it. It's just that I share for inspiration for people who've perhaps not come across things and are perhaps looking for similar solutions as I do for things. It's like Neocolors, but it's okay drawing on the waxy surface. It's nice, it's smooth, it's slick. But I had noticed after a while that it was starting to gum up the tips of my pens just a little. So, and I wanted a way of bringing out colours, so it started with the glossy gel medium, and then it went on to, oh, gesso, after seeing a video that popped up on YouTube. It's funny how that happens. I'm looking for a solution, and YouTube must read my mind and give me suggestions of videos that will answer or remind me of things I knew once and have forgotten, or still there in my head, but need something to rattle my brain and let things drop out occasionally. I like the idea of adding layers of colours though, without them muddying. That is really useful for backgrounds. Because as I say so often, I do like a bit of background colour to work on. So I'm going to leave you here today. Thank you for joining me. I hope you have some fun creating your own arch variations, or Crescent Moon variations if you want to call them that. I don't mind, honestly. And come up with a page full. I haven't got a page full yet, but no doubt I will at some point. So until I see you again, please look after yourselves, take care, and find time to be creative. Ta-ta, bye for now.